They asked for 70% of our gold. We offered 100% of our dignity. I did not reject their terms to provoke them. I did it because every child in Africa deserves to inherit more than debt.
It began with a letter signed by powerful hands, carrying a choice that no sovereign nation should ever face: surrender the rights to your natural wealth, or pay the cost with everything you have. There were no negotiations, just a deadline drawn in red. 2 days. 70% of Burkina Faso's gold, or billions in debt collection, immediate, unforgiving, and final. The world may have seen a policy decision. But here in the heart of Africa, we saw something else. A line in the sand. A moment that would test the strength of a people and the courage of a leader named Captain Ibrahim Traoré. This story isn't about revenge. It's about remembrance. It's about a continent that has given more than it ever received and now stands ready to reclaim its voice. If you still believe that justice should never come with a price tag, then listen closely. Because what you're about to hear will never make it into the evening news. Burkina Faso, a land rich in gold, but long denied the right to its own destiny, had already taken bold steps to reclaim its future. The year before, foreign troops withdrew. International contracts were re-evaluated, and the nation began to rewrite the terms of its own economic story. But the moment a government declares our land is not for sale, the pressure begins. The usual channels, aid suspensions, financial ratings, investor hesitancy follow closely behind. Still, Burkina Faso did not fold. Instead, it began to build quietly, steadily, a national economic framework grounded in sovereignty and self-determination. Then came the gold. Not new gold, but newly controlled. For the first time in decades, the country's most precious resource was being managed, not from abroad, but from within. Revenues began to stay in the country. Infrastructure projects resumed. Salaries for public servants were paid from local accounts. It was modest, it was imperfect, but it was independent. That independence, however, came at a cost. Behind closed doors, meetings intensified in global capitals. Financial institutions, many of which had long supported external mining operations in the Sahel, voiced concern. Geopolitical partners began to speak of stability, and a new kind of pressure arrived not through soldiers, but through spreadsheets. A debt recovery strategy appeared, authored by advisors representing multiple global stakeholders. The proposal was framed as cooperation. But in practice, it asked for what no free nation could accept: immediate access to the country's gold production in exchange for debt relief. 70%. 48 hours. For many outside Africa, this might seem like routine finance. But for the people of Burkina Faso, and millions watching across the continent, it was a moment heavy with history. A reminder of decades where extraction came first and dignity came last. Captain Ibrahim Traoré understood this. He didn't just see numbers. He saw a choice between silence and sovereignty. What happened next wasn't just a reaction. It was a declaration. It was early morning in Ouagadougou when the envelope arrived, hand-delivered, sealed, and urgent. Inside was a diplomatic cable labeled Debt Recovery Strategy Framework. No ceremony, no preface, just bolded language and a strict ultimatum. Burkina Faso must allow multinational corporations, primarily from the United States, Canada, France, the UK, and Germany, to begin extracting 70% of its newly mined gold. In return, the country's financial obligations to global lenders would be gradually adjusted. But there was more. The document outlined new oversight mechanisms. A foreign advisory board would be installed to supervise mining contracts. Export routes would be monitored. All future revenue streams linked to natural resources would be held under third-party review. In exchange, Burkina Faso would be promised support, protection against civil unrest, technology partnerships, and advisory assistance in maintaining regime stability. The tone was firm, the message unmistakable. Agree within 48 hours or prepare for economic isolation, resource sanctions, and a potential erosion of domestic security. To some, it may have looked like diplomacy, but to Captain Ibrahim Traoré, it read like something else entirely. A warning. Traoré, a former artillery commander turned head of state, did not wait. He summoned his closest advisors, ministers, military strategists, and resource experts for a closed-door meeting at the presidential palace. There were no leaks, no press, just purpose. As the group reviewed the document, silence filled the room. Then Traoré spoke. This is not about debt. This is about direction. They are not asking for gold. They are asking for control. The decision was made before the meeting ended. There would be no compliance, no surrender of sovereignty. Instead, Traoré activated a plan that had quietly taken shape over months' operation horizon. The strategy was simple. First, secure the mines. Second, encrypt all geological data. Third, transfer surveillance systems from foreign contractors to a trusted domestic security force. And finally, prepare a national broadcast, not just for Burkina Faso, but for Africa. Within hours, military vehicles moved to secure mining zones. Telecommunications were rerouted through national infrastructure. Gold shipments were paused, and all foreign personnel working in extraction were asked to temporarily step aside, not arrested, not harmed, just asked firmly but respectfully to leave operational sites. Then came the message. At precisely noon, every screen in the country went black. Then, without fanfare, Traoré appeared. No gold-plated podium, no dramatic lighting, just the captain in uniform. One hand resting on the Burkina flag, the other holding the letter he'd received. To the people of Burkina Faso, and to every nation that still believes in its right to self-determination. The world has changed. We are no longer being asked to repay loans. We are being told to surrender our future. He paused. Let it be known we will not trade our children's inheritance for momentary relief. We will not sell our soil, our labor, or our legacy. Not to anyone. Not under pressure. Not under promises. Then he raised the letter. You gave us 48 hours. Here is our response. He set the letter down, looked straight into the camera, and delivered a line that would echo across the continent. Burkina Faso is not for sale. Within moments, the streets outside filled with chants. No violence, no fire, just the unified sound of pride. From Ouagadougou to rural towns, people repeated his words, not for sale. But outside Burkina Faso, the reaction was swift and far more tense. In European capitals, emergency calls were placed. In Washington, financial analysts reviewed projections. In Paris, resource firms requested government support to protect long-term interests. But in all that urgency, one quiet truth emerged. Burkina Faso had not retaliated with aggression. It had responded with strategy. The gold had not been hidden. It had been secured. The country had not cut itself off. It had asserted control. This wasn't chaos, it was clarity. And as news spread across the continent, something even more powerful began to happen. Across Africa, people began asking the same question. If they can do it, why can't we? In the hours following Traoré's national address, statements from financial institutions began to surface, measured, careful, and designed to sound neutral. Some officials claimed the proposal was misinterpreted. Others insisted it was not a demand, but a development framework. The term gradual repayment was repeated often, but words can't erase intent. And buried within the original cable were lines that revealed the deeper objective, not just access to gold, but access to influence. The document had outlined the creation of an oversight board housed outside Burkina Faso, tasked with reviewing mining permits, advising on financial policy, and managing export routes. In simpler terms, a second layer of decision-making far from the hands of the Burkinabe people. Then came the note. At the top of the cable, written in red ink, Traoré has 48 hours. This is non-negotiable. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a line in the sand. As the story unfolded, media around the world took sides. In major Western outlets, headlines framed Traoré's decision as reckless. Pundits warned of economic collapse and isolationist danger. One even described his move as economic defiance dressed in nationalism. But inside Burkina Faso, the view was different. What some called defiance, others called dignity. And beyond its borders, many across Africa recognized the moment for what it was: a nation refusing to be managed. Across Mali, Niger, and Guinea countries with histories of similar pressure, leaders began quietly signaling support. Civil society groups launched digital campaigns, highlighting the long history of Africa's resource exploitation. Hashtags trended, videos circulated, and soon, a growing number of people began asking questions that financial institutions hoped would never reach the surface. Questions like, why are repayment schedules rarely negotiated, but extraction contracts always are? Why does gold leave Africa at full value, but return in the form of loans with interest? Why is sovereignty framed as risk, while dependence is labeled stability? Those weren't questions about politics. They were questions about ethics, about structure, about whether a continent could truly rise if its ground remained mortgaged. Behind the scenes, analysts quietly acknowledged what they hadn't expected. Traoré hadn't just refused a deal. He had revealed a system where access to resources was tied to compliance, where aid could be paused with a signature but extraction continued without pause, where development loans often returned to donor nations through inflated contracts and external consulting fees. This wasn't new, but it had rarely been shown so clearly. One African economist called it a mirror no one wanted to look into. Because the truth wasn't just uncomfortable, it was documented. For years, confidential reports from multinational boards had expressed concern about sovereign interference in African mining zones. Another document revealed discussions on preemptive partnerships to avoid hostile nationalizations. The language was technical, but the meaning was simple: how to secure access before a country took control of its own wealth. When Traoré nationalized key gold operations, the fear wasn't just about loss of revenue. It was about the precedent. Because if Burkina Faso could do it without collapse, others might try. And that, for many global powers, was the real concern. Even more revealing were the back channels. According to diplomatic sources, quiet efforts were made to reach out to the president, not to threaten, but to persuade. Offers of technical support, proposals for private talks, promises of future cooperation if he reconsidered. But by then, Traoré had made his position clear. Burkina Faso was open to the world, but not at the cost of its autonomy. We will collaborate, he reportedly told one envoy, but we will not be managed. That line resonated far beyond gold. Because in those words, many heard the echo of generations past, leaders who spoke of independence not just as a moment, but as a mission. Men and women who believed that sovereignty was not only about borders, but about decision-making. In Traoré's stance, young Africans found something rare: a leader who didn't speak of self-reliance as a campaign slogan, but as a practice. And in boardrooms across the world, the questions changed. From will he comply to what happens if others follow? Because the truth was no longer hidden. It had been televised, translated, and made viral. And once the truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. Captain Traoré's refusal didn't start a war, but it did start a wave. Within hours, satellite activity over West Africa surged. Intelligence reports confirmed increased drone traffic in the Sahel. In Washington and Brussels, closed-door meetings multiplied. Financial experts debated damage control. Security analysts warned of potential contagion. And on social media, algorithms shifted searches for Burkina Faso, and Ibrahim Traoré suddenly surged. But on the ground in Ouagadougou, something quieter, more profound was happening. teachers began holding civic sessions on economic history. University halls filled with conversations about currency independence. Market vendors hung posters reading "Not for sale" in bold black ink. And across neighborhoods, the mood was clear. This wasn't just a political moment. It was personal. The country's youth, long accustomed to hearing that change must come from elsewhere, saw something different now. They saw a future worth defending, not with force, but with vigilance. Volunteers signed up to protect key infrastructure. Community radio stations re-aired Traoré's speech nightly. Women's groups gathered food supplies for security teams guarding the mines. This wasn't just national pride. It was shared purpose. But beyond Burkina Faso, consequences began to ripple. In media centers from Johannesburg to Nairobi, commentators asked whether this was the start of a new alignment. News segments titled "Africa's Quiet Rebellion" began to appear. In Accra, a popular morning show asked bluntly, "Why does standing up for your own resources cause such global alarm?" Meanwhile, within Western media, the tone shifted. Coverage turned critical. Words like "strongman military leader" and "anti-West populist" filled headlines. Networks speculated about instability. Think tanks warned of potential foreign influence. But the people of Burkina Faso had already heard these descriptions before. And this time, they weren't deterred. Instead, they responded online with dignity and sharp humor. Young artists turned headlines into protest songs. Street murals appeared portraying Traoré standing above a map of Africa. And viral videos remixed news anchors' concern into satire captioned with, "If they're nervous, we must be doing something right." But even as joy filled the streets, tension brewed behind the scenes. Private contractors tied to foreign security firms began moving near strategic borders. Surveillance patterns shifted. And intelligence reports noted a growing number of misinformation campaigns. Fake audio-forged documents, rumors of internal dissent, all designed to fracture public confidence. Traoré's administration moved swiftly. Digital defense teams were activated. AES regional allies, Mali, Niger, and Guinea, sent reinforcements. Strategic gold convoys were rerouted. Emergency drills were conducted in the north. A quiet but powerful message was sent to anyone watching. We will not be surprised, and we will not be alone. Then, in an unannounced visit, Colonel Assimi Goïta of Mali and General Abdourahmane Chiani of Niger arrived in Ouagadougou. They met Traoré not as guests, but as equals. Side by side, they stood before cameras and declared, "If you touch one of us, you touch all of us." It was more than a gesture. It was a doctrine, the beginnings of what some would call Africa's answer to the North Atlantic Treaty, an alliance not built on treaties alone, but on a shared memory of struggle. From that moment, retaliation, if it came, would not go unchallenged. International observers took notice. Intelligence reports now included the acronym AES, not just as a political alliance, but as a regional shield. Investors recalculated risk. Diplomats revised tone. And still Traoré made no threats, no boasts. Just one consistent message. We want peace, but we will protect what is ours. The world was watching, but this time Africa was too. And for the first time in a generation, millions were not watching in silence. For decades, the story of African resistance has often been told in past tense portraits in museums, chapters in textbooks, or moments marked by memorials. But now something different was unfolding. Not a rebellion of the past, but a reimagining of the future. Not a protest against colonial ghosts, but a challenge to modern systems dressed in polite language development, stability investment. What Captain Ibrahim Traoré had done was not simply refuse a deal. He exposed an architecture, a global financial structure, where value is often extracted faster than dignity can be restored. His defiance revealed what many suspected, but few had proven so openly, that influence doesn't always arrive with tanks. Sometimes it arrives in contracts. And while critics called him impulsive, Burkina Faso's next steps told a different story. Within days, the country launched new protocols, a national gold reserve system, independent valuation boards, and a strategic partnership council drawn from civilian economists and regional advisors. These were not acts of isolation. They were steps toward insulation, protecting the country's decisions from volatility and interference. But more importantly, the resistance spread not just across borders, but across sectors. In Mali, Niger, and Guinea, similar audits were initiated. Discussions began around a joint AES resource policy. One proposal even suggested the formation of a Pan-African sovereign wealth fund, financed through mineral revenues and dedicated to education infrastructure and regional defense. Another initiative focused on building a digital payment system independent of the CFA franc and USD, tested first in local markets, then across AES borders. And then came two unexpected players, China and Russia. Unlike previous foreign actors, they didn't arrive with ultimatums. They offered infrastructure for mining operations, digital finance platforms, and perhaps most crucially alternatives to Western valuation systems. To many observers in the West, this raised alarm, but inside Africa, it sparked questions that had long remained dormant. Should development always come with dependency? Is partnership only valid if one side controls the rules? Can a continent truly be free if it does not set its own price for what lies beneath its soil? These were not rhetorical questions. They were practical, deeply strategic, and long overdue. The response from Western institutions was swift. Policy papers warned of authoritarian influence. Editorials decried a dangerous shift in alliances. Financial markets reacted with caution. But few stopped to ask why these moves were gaining traction, not through force, but through resonance. Because beneath the geopolitical chessboard, there is something more powerful than diplomacy or defense, the feeling that you're no longer alone. And that's what AES has begun to provide, not a perfect solution, but a protective framework. One rooted not in ideology, but in shared experience. One that says, you don't have to face the storm by yourself. For years, African governments were told to make hard choices, cut subsidies, liberalize markets, reduce tariffs. But what Traoré demonstrated was that hard doesn't always mean right. That national interest isn't selfish, it's sovereign. And that protecting the right to decide on land, on loans, on labor is not extremism, it's leadership. This is not to ignore the risks. The path Burkina Faso has taken is steep. Economic retaliation remains possible. Disinformation campaigns will likely persist. Internal stability must still be earned, not assumed. But something has changed. The narrative is no longer one of begging for terms. It's one of setting them. And when a small landlocked nation does that without violence, without collapse, without apology, it sends a signal stronger than speeches to every young leader in Africa wondering if integrity can survive in politics. To every student questioning whether sovereignty is still possible in the age of globalization. To every grandmother who once marched for independence and now wonders what became of the promise. That signal is this. The promise didn't die. It was just waiting to be claimed again. And now it is. This story isn't just about gold. It isn't even just about Burkina Faso. It's about the quiet courage to choose sovereignty in a world that often rewards surrender. It's about a leader who refused to be pressured, a people who stood firm, and a continent that may finally be ready to reclaim what was always theirs. Not only land, not only minerals, but the right to decide their future. Captain Ibrahim Traoré did not claim perfection. He did not promise ease. But he did something rare in global politics. He told the truth. Burkina Faso is not for sale, he said. And through that simple phrase, millions found something more valuable than any currency clarity. Now the question is no longer, what will he do next? It's, what will we? Will we listen or look away? Will we defend the dignity of self-determination, or let it be defined for us? You don't have to live in Burkina Faso to understand what's at stake. The lines drawn there echo far beyond the Sahel. They reach into every country, every boardroom, every decision where justice and power collide. So if you've ever believed that dignity is worth defending, if you've ever marched spoken or simply hoped for a world where fairness matters, then this moment belongs to you too. Because what's at stake is not just Africa's minerals. It's Africa's mirror, held up to a world that must now choose what kind of future it wants to reflect.